it's always been really great for me because it's always been something I can go to, something I felt very personally, because it's my name, and I just felt it like, you know, I felt it almost as something that could protect me on a very deep level. I always feel like there's this angel with my name fighting for me, and not just me, for everyone that I pray for. But it's kind of nice having that name. Another instance where my faith was tested was well, not tested per se, but when I was I guess the knowledge of my faith was tested. I remember I'm on the swim team up at Skidmore, and in January, actually, like right about now, in January, they go on a training trip, usually to Puerto Rico. This year they're in Florida, but I remember one year when we were in Puerto Rico, and it was after 2 practices that day, so we were all kind of tired, sitting around, sitting in like the hot tub at the hotel. And I remember my one friend.
That sounds nice.
Yeah. Oh, it was really nice. It was a good evening. We were all just kind of chilling out. Some light conversation. And I don't know how we got to the topic of it, but we all started, talking about like how the universe was created, and what happens, when we die and all that sort of thing. And my friend Carl, I gotta thank him for this, because honestly, when he asked the questions, like I gave him my best response, but honestly, it just set me on this path where I was like discovering my own faith, and I gotta thank him for that, honestly. He turned to me and he's like, well, Mike, what do you think happens when we die? And being me, I respond, well, Carl, I think that, if you've been in line with what Jesus has been talking about, and you go to heaven and you live with him and all of his followers and everyone who's lived a good life, and you live eternally joyful with Jesus. And he kind of turned to me and he's like, okay, that's kind of cool. And like he kept on asking me more about my faith, like, how can you think that that God has this big role and like this big plan in our lives? What is it about God that makes him so real to you? And like I told him, well, I mean, it's really hard for me to grasp at this point, but it's just something about how, I think I was saying since last time when I was here, these like big spiral galaxies, about how like the spirals are formed, and then like and how they're in this like almost perfect formation, and how you can shrink that down onto like a small level. You see like the spiral in like a seashell, and the way that is, it just speaks of an intelligent design to me. And that's just one example. But then he starts getting onto like, well, how can you think about how when you die, like how do you know? I mean, I'm like, well, you don't really. I mean, you just have, that's part of it. You just have to have faith. And he just kind of looked at me like kind of strangely, and he's like, yeah. And then he kind of like was like, well, thanks, Mike. I explained a couple of things, about my faith that he had some questions about. And I honestly don't even remember what I said about it at the time, because I think at that point God was just blessing me and giving me, gifts of the Holy Spirit, that I could say those words that he needed to hear to him and meet him where he was at in his life. And I honestly thank God every day for that conversation, because not only did I think I helped him understand my faith and give him some questions that he could go out and discover for himself, but I think he also gave me this starting point for me to develop my faith a little bit further. So I think that's the beauty of what God can do. He allows you to carry out his mission, but he also helps you to develop your own soul and your own spiritual welfare.
It's always interesting, because at moments when we don't really expect it, right? Like you didn't really expect to have that conversation with your friend, and like you said, it kind of sparked things that it just wasn't even on your mind or on your radar. So that's always interesting. That's always exciting, and that's incredible what you said about nature and how God created. Set things in motion, and how the proportions of different things, just they can't, they're just so perfect. And so, you even think about the human body and how all the parts work together to allow you to move and to allow you to think and to see and to hear. It's just so inspiring, like how the little DNA molecules to the little atoms to,
Right. Yeah,
it's amazing.
I remember my friend Chris. If you're listening, I'm gonna try and quote you on this, but I remember my friend Chris Gaudino. He told me, that he found God in microbiology. That like in the study of the human cell, because he said, to quote him, the human biology is so complicated, and the cell itself is just very, very complicated.
Yeah, it's like what mind could have made all of that, and it's not like ours. God is, he's God, and that's just truly amazing that we can't even fathom, like our minds can't even comprehend what God is and like what, who he is, but we know that he loves us and how much he cares for us, which is amazing. And I mean, that totally fits in with our topic of faith in our society. We see a lot of times that there's that division of evolution. You believe in evolution, or you believe in God, but they could both exist. You could believe that God set. I'm not a theologian on this or anything, but I'm just trying to think that they could both exist, in that God created things, or he also set the world to go. So I had a question for you. That's great that you swim at college. Do you feel connected with God when you swim, or how does that, I guess, in your life, how does that help you?
Yeah. So when it's an interesting experience when I swim. It's actually bringing up some things right now. I'm not sure if it's just the Holy Spirit pouring on some energy, but
yeah, I like to believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I swim, it's kind of a it's this daily routine where it's like you get up early in the morning, you make this walk over to the athletic center, you change into the suit, you get over to there, and you get in the pool. You start the warm up, you start your set for the day, and then you finish strong and you warm down. You just and it's like this constant repetition that the whole team goes through, and then it's just some days are harder than others, and some days are a little bit easier. And I think it's interesting because it kind of reflects the struggles in our lives to show that like not every day is going to be the easiest day for Catholics. Some days you're going to have great success, and you're going to be like, yeah, I did it. I did this thing today, and then some other days are going to be harder than others. And you're just going to feel exhausted by the end of it. But it's actually really great. It's a really, I just think it's a really great comparison, that idea of practicing the faith and then practicing the swim practice. It's some days are going to be easy, some days are going to be hard, and I just think they're great. It's a great comparison between the two. So.
Yeah, well, thank you. And Barbara just walked in.
Yeah, hey, good morning, everybody.
Hello, I love the blue.
Did I miss a lot?
No, we were just talking about different stories about Mike's experience in college, and no, we were just on the topic that he swims, and I just asked him about how he experiences God when he swims, and just that whole experience, and he was just mentioning how it's relatable to life, how some practices are hard, which is like life, like some days are hard, some days are easier,
and it's always, no matter how hard or how easy the practice is, it's always better with people who are going through it with you. When you come out of a hard practice and you're just kind of like ragged and tired, and you see that the other guys kind of just on the team just looking sore and like moaning about how hard some of the sets were, you're just kind of like, there's like a camaraderie in that, and I kind of parallel that with the camaraderie that you feel when you in life, you know, when you're in church, or like you get out of like a really great, like, you know, gospel, like a really great, you get like a really great priest, and he has like a really great homily that really hits you right in the chest, like in your heart, and you see other people around the church like getting it too. It's like, wow, it's like that sort of experience.
See, that's what's so important, that fellowship, especially among young adults. You know, because you could, if you had a bunch of people that were still in the same place you were, then you could talk to each other about, wow, this happened and that happened. But I feel that especially the population right now in the colleges, that it's really almost like not considered politically correct to believe in God.
Oh yeah.
Right? You would say that.
Yeah.
And you're looked at kind of as an unsophisticated, ignorant person, even.
Yeah. I think I remember talking to you about this, but I think it's a little hypocritical. You know, how you know, people nowadays they're talking about how you know, people, like, you know, they always like, oh, I identify as such and such, or I believe this and that, and then like you go and you kind of like put your faith forward, and they look at you like you have 7 heads, and they're like, what are you, crazy? Like what are you talking about?
Oh, right.
And then like, you know, so like the way that I feel like I should combat that is just like, you know, use that popular phrase of, you know, triggered. It's like, oh, you're triggering me. I really don't
I
want
love
you.
it.
You're kind of offending me here. You know, you're kind of attacking my identity because it's my faith. So
I
kind of
love
just
it.
use that.
You're triggering me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's such a catch-all phrase right now. Everybody's getting triggered.
Everyone's getting triggered.
We have to live in a bubble, an emotional bubble, you know, to keep from being triggered. But yeah, I like that. We were talking about that yesterday, and the whole idea that everyone's so concerned about being politically correct, but when it comes to us talking about God, nobody wants to be politically correct with us. You know, we're just, you know, somebody to be dismissed and ignored, basically.
Yeah, Father Peter's here too. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Well, it didn't take us long to get into some very heavy topics.
I know, and we had transportation. Sorry, we had transportation miracles today.
Well, we got here very quickly. Yes, the Lord cleared the roads. We were a little bit late, but we thought we were going to be even later. But the beautiful thing is to realize that there are lots of people who are, you know, really trying to articulate the faith very well. And of course, we have to ultimately need the gift of faith, but we also need to use our reason too. And this is where, especially for young people, because ideas have power too. Sometimes there's a prejudice in our psychologically oriented world that relationships are the only thing that move people. Well, they do, but especially for young people, ideas, the power of an idea, you know, you have a conviction about it. So to study and reflect on your faith is important, because it'll get clearer, and you know, you'll be more convinced of it. You see, so you have to work on it. Like you know, it was not only that you know, Jesus really wanted Peter to say, "You're the Christ." He didn't want Peter wishy-washy. You know, that's why he said, "You're very fortunate, Peter, because you were able to make that breakthrough and make that leap." He wasn't perfect. He was going to fall into problems later on, but he responded to that grace. You are the Christ. You see, so that's and it was important to Jesus that Peter get to that point. And it's important for Jesus today that we get to that point too, and say, "You're the Christ. You're the Savior, and this is why we're with you." So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's great.
So when you say study, Father, sorry to cut you off, do you mean like study in the sense of like going to religious ed and like taking a class, or just when we go to church to?
Well, it could be a lot of things. It could be a lot of things, but it would be great if people realize that they do have to reflect on their faith, take time to reflect on their faith. That used to be the great thing about going to a Catholic university. You used to be able to get some philosophy and theology, and I guess you still can in some good places. But I just had read a book recently, and I don't get a chance to, as much as a pastor, to read a philosophy book from beginning to end. You know, but I did this one it was the immortal in you. The immortal in you, because you know, the other philosophies, materialist philosophies that say that nothing exists except matter, you know, usually it's this life, and then when you die, that's it. You know, whatever is you is now oblivion. You know, there's nothing to it, and they try to find meaning in this world. But if you can show that the human soul is immortal, even by reason, or at least give very strong indications of that, that's the golden ring. You know, that's the first prize, or one of the first prizes of philosophy. And an interesting book came out by this fellow Agros, The Immortal in You, where he puts the proofs for the immortality of the soul in very contemporary, very how should I say, colloquial language. It's not a stuffy book.
Can you give us like one example that would appeal to
well,
listeners?
the idea, of course, of the idea is to show that the intellect is in touch with universal ideas. In other words, like, where do we get the idea of justice from? We've never seen perfect justice, but we compare any event. Oh, he was just. This is unjust. We're comparing it to something because we're able to transcend all material things. See, this is a great gift of Plato. Plato or he has Socrates in his dialogues talk about the immortality of the soul, and I forget which one, Phaedo or whatever. You know, he says finally at the end, you know, Cebes is one of the young men of Athens that they taught. Cebes, therefore, it is absolutely certain that the human soul will survive the death of the body. I mean, if Plato had said nothing but that would put him way over the top. And it's amazing. So anyway, we need to sort of get back to thinking about these issues.
So what was exactly saying that
well,
we wouldn't have a concept of justice? If
right,
we
the universals, or a triangle. Let's take the idea of a triangle. We all have an idea of a triangle. We've never seen a perfect triangle. We've seen examples of triangles, and also the triangle also has to have some material involved in it, but we transcend that. We can apply the notion triangle to lots of different figures that we see. You see, and animals don't do that. Okay, so in other words, there's a spiritual dimension to our thinking that goes beyond that. Of course, and because conscience and everything gets even more subtle when you come down into that. Okay, so all I was saying is that thinking about both philosophically and theologically can really help certain people be convinced, because ideas are important too. Relationships, I mean, probably the best example of somebody who thought his way into the Catholic Church, he didn't even have any friends who were Catholic, was Newman. That's one of the reasons he's so great, but not everybody's going to follow that path, but everybody needs to know that we're not just out over deep water and over our heads and not knowing what we're talking about. You know, that we really can reflect on the truths of our faith and give good reasons for them.
Yeah.
See, on our own level. Of course, for most people, it's going to be our personal witness, our lives. You know, but there is that dimension of ideas. That's what I was trying. And of course, you're a college student, right? So the professors are coming in and they're talking ideas. They're talking ideas, and you try to go beneath their ideas and see, is it a materialist philosophy? Is it open to universal values? Is there immortality here? Does this life have to be explained in terms only of itself, or is there a beyond? Does our conscience put us in touch with God or not? Or is it just a product of the experiences of ourselves and others? That have reinforced certain behaviors illogically or irrationally, that type of thing. Is that all it is? Wash your hands. Or don't steal is the same thing as wash your hands. Well, no, don't steal is different from wash your hands. Wash your hands is a good habit that you'll pick up from your parents, and good for your health too. But don't steal. Stealing might be good for you, because you'd have something you didn't have before. But how do you know it's still wrong? You see what I mean? It's a different thing.
So the conscience tells us that we're immortal too.
Yes. Ultimately, conscience can be used to demonstrate the existence of God, and that it's not a direct proof of immortality of itself, but it points to the fact that there is a universal right and wrong, and then you can go from that to say, well, who is the author of that? See, who's the author of that?
So I have a question for Michael and Caterina. Do you find that when you are trying to evangelize to students or, to your friends, not trying deliberately, but just, maybe put in a little God comment, do you find that they might be more receptive if they have some kind of crisis going on, like maybe someone in their family is ill, or they suddenly come up against themselves in some way.
Yeah, I definitely feel like, I mean, in those areas of your life where you feel like everything's, you know, spiraling down, I feel like I mean, to get to, the only way to go up is to reach the very bottom, and I've been at that point, so, and I feel like my friends have too. They've been at these low points in their lives, and I think it really does help with God coming into their life. I mean, and just for a little personal example on my part, I remember I went up to school to go visit my friends, because they missed me, and I kind of missed them, so I wanted to say hi to them. You know, we had a little party. It was a little bit of fun, and then the next day it was Sunday, and I asked them if they would mind, you know, giving me a ride to church, and I actually got, you know, I had this other one friend in the group who's, you know, a devout Catholic, and she goes to church, and I just expected us to be me and her that day, but it turns out, you know, the person who was driving the car ended up coming into Mass with us, and another person who I didn't think would be, you know, coming to church that day with us, that she decided, oh, I'm going to come to church with you guys today. I'm like, oh, was any particular reason? She's like, oh, well, my grandmother died 2 days ago, and, you know, she would have wanted me to go. So I thought it was really beautiful that, you know, that love and that faith that her grandmother showed to her, you know, it transferred over, and it just it filled her heart with, you know, this. I don't know if she recognized it, but with God and this love for God, and, you know, it allowed her to take her first steps and going into church and you know, hopefully developing a deeper spiritual life. So
I guess the trick is for it to stay that way, for them to, right? Because we go through these crises and we think, oh wow, there is a God, something's going on here, and then it's so easy to have it robbed from us. You know, our own ego actually robs it, not just the world and the enemy, but our own ego, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
You remember how many people got back to church right after 9/11?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Place was crazy.
The churches were a little crowded the first couple of weeks after 9/11, but then it trickled off because people were expecting more attacks. You know, they thought, oh, there are these sleeper cells, and this has happened. Somebody else is going to pull something, and we better be praying now. But then after a month or two, it began to trickle down again. And then there's, of course, the little expression, there are no atheists in foxholes. Well, that's true. That may be true to some degree, but you want there to be no atheists in the classroom too. That's a harder thing. That's a hard. You'd rather have people be able to calmly look at the situation and not under, you know, in panic or in fear that they're going to die that day. You know.
Right.
Yeah, and Michael and I had this great discussion the other day about evolution too. Remember?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that earlier before, about how, you know, there's this I think I said it the last time I was on. There was like this. I'm not an expert on this, so don't you know, take my word as true, like as like, you know, rote truth. But I remember reading somewhere about how somewhere in the fossil record there's just this area where there's just rock, and, like, you know, we can't really see, like, you see like these little, like, specks of, like, you know, microbiology, you know, like actually, like, you know, small, like, tiny fossilized creatures in, like, you know, in the rock. And then, you know, it takes, like, these, like, you know, as the rock layers go up, as it becomes more towards recent history, you can see, like, there's just, like, this it's called the Cambrian explosion, where they discovered, like, you know, there's, like, this, like, huge surge of life and evolution, and it just kind of is like, it's just kind of like this, it just kind of looked like it came out of nowhere. So, you know, I think it's interesting that, you know, it goes from, you know, not a lot, it goes from, like, literally no life to a little bit of life, and then it just, a lot of species and a lot of different things come up, and almost seemingly out of nowhere, and it's almost like, you know, if you look at Genesis, it's kind of like, you know, God made the fish in the sea, he made the animals in the land, and it's kind of just like he spoke the word and they were there. So, you know, that's kind of interesting.
Wow, so science is starting to actually underscore Scripture, right? The Word of God.
Yeah, it's kind of beautiful.
We have another special guest that just came. We had a lot of surprises today, and that's Suzanne. And I want her to tell you a little bit about herself, and she's here also to talk about some of the secular issues of dealing with her life, her career, in a society that's pretty much not about God.
Good morning, Barbara, Caterina, Father, Michael. I really enjoyed Michael's little speech. I remember as a child going to Catholic school and learning about evolution and having this great big base in, well, God made the world, and I could just never conceive of a situation where the world just came out of nowhere. It was just ingrained in me and in my very spirit that, of course, God made the world. And I don't know where this crazy theory came from, but I know a lot of people do believe in that. So, but I really did just appreciate that story. But at any rate, I'm an attorney, and I know Barbara very well. Barbara's been extremely helpful to me in my faith journey and keeping me in line, so to speak, in my own faith. And I do a lot of trust and estates work, so I deal with a lot of folks, a lot of elderly folks, and a lot of their children and families, and I also do a lot of real estate. So the issues that I come against and that I struggle with on a daily basis are mainly pressure and money. And it's interesting, when I tried to boil it all down, those were the two issues that came up for me, was that we as attorneys are under a lot of pressure, a lot of time pressure, and we're always under a lot of financial pressure, whether it's our clients' financial pressure, our financial pressure, our colleagues' financial pressure. So many of the issues that I struggle with, and first let me say that I do pray unceasingly, even though I didn't know that. Barbara helped me to remind myself that I do that, because all day long I'm asking God and the Holy Spirit and several of the saints to intercede for me in making decisions and trying to do the right thing in what I'm doing so I can feel good about what I'm doing. But a lot of what happens is basically this. You'll have somebody come in and they're in a hurry and they need something done and they want it done and they won't go away. And it's kind of like a small child when you tell them, oh, you can't watch TV today. And they're like, but Mom, I want to watch TV, I want to watch TV. And then you think, okay, it's so much easier to just let this child watch TV and I can get on with what I need to get on with. And then you have a client saying, well, please notarize this document. My mom really wants me to have this house, and she signed it, and she's not here, but you should notarize it anyway so that the house can be transferred to me. Or, similarly with, well, my wife really wants to transfer the house to me, and can you just notarize this document? And, of course, you know deep down in your heart, well, I don't know your wife, I don't know your mom. I can't tell whether or not
Does your mom really want this, or is this...
I have no idea, right? And as attorneys, we have a strict ethical code that we have to follow, but it oftentimes doesn't dovetail with our faith. And so there are some things that we can do, even though I know in my heart this is not what God would want me to do, and that there are other things that just don't cut the mustard, so to speak, in either way, right? Either through the code of ethics that we're required to follow, or through my faith in God. So you're then in a position where you have to kind of try to make this person go away, and it's not always simple to do that. But more often than not, it's the client that comes in that has a situation that they want you to handle, a case that they want you to handle, and you really have to size up the person that's in front of you and size up the matter that they're asking you to handle, whether it's in court or just on a transactional basis, and decide whether or not this is something you want to do. And of course, it's not always in your own financial interest to send these people away, but you can't, or I can't, in good conscience, follow what I know God is telling me, which is, please don't take this case. Let this person go to another attorney who surely will take this case, but it's not something that I want to do. So very often it's, my mother needs a guardian. Okay, is everybody in agreement? Are your siblings in agreement? Yes, they're all in agreement, you know. And once we get the money, that's the part where we're not in agreement, because then, you know, my sister needs a bigger house and I need this. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, this is still your mother's money and your mom's still alive and she needs care. So the idea of having a guardian appointed in court is to manage the money to take care of your mom, not to manage the money to take care of you, so that your mother is now destitute and surely won't even be able to get government assistance because these transfers have been made and they're impermissible transfers for Medicaid purposes. So that's the pretty common situation.
So it kind of comes up on you like a surprise, would you say, Suzanne? Like all of a sudden you're like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't have all the... They didn't tell me the whole thing. They don't disclose the whole thing at first.
So what happens is, you know, most people come in and they're telling a story and they don't really give you a chance to ask questions. So you have to kind of let them get through their story. And if you don't let them get through their story, they become very frustrated. Sometimes they become very angry and hostile, and it's a little bit, it's unsettling for me, it's difficult for me, and immediately that's already a red flag, right? They're becoming hostile, they're becoming angry because I'm asking questions.
They don't want to necessarily answer.
They don't necessarily want to answer.
Yeah.
And then so you get to the point where you start to ask them the questions, and then you start to get answers you really don't like. And all of a sudden, the Holy Spirit is saying, Suzanne, maybe you should just send this person back on his way. And then unfortunately, and this isn't a dig to my colleagues because not everybody is like this, but then you have other attorneys who are asking you to do things that they don't necessarily want to handle because they don't want to be on the hot seat, so to speak, or you're in the middle of a case that you know that can settle and everybody can walk away happy, and well, not necessarily happy because nobody's really happy in a settlement, right? It's a big compromise, but you'll have an attorney who doesn't want to settle. He'll say, well, you know, let's continue with depositions and we can make a little more money. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, well, there's always another client behind us to make a little more money. Why do we have to take money from these people unnecessarily when we know that there's a settlement here? So there's all sorts of permutations and combinations of situations that happen on a regular basis, and it's a struggle. It really is a struggle because
one thing I would just want to draw a little connection between being a counselor and being a lawyer. You know, because we also kind of run into that stuff, and I guess what I'm trying to say is like it's hard to backtrack once you're involved and invested in the person, you know, and committed to the person. It's so hard to then say, oh, sorry, there's some things here I'm not comfortable with, go see some, you know, and we're talking about how evangelizing is to meet people where they actually are at, which is pretty tricky because sometimes they're not at a great place at all.
You're absolutely right, and there's an awful lot of counseling that I do that when I'm starting to do a bill, I start to think, well, that whole conversation was more of a psychotherapy session that I'm not qualified to do because I'm not a psychotherapist. So can I really bill them for legal work when in fact it was psychotherapy? But you're absolutely right. You really do. And this is something that I learned. I've been doing this for now over 20 years, right? This is something that you learn as you go along. You have to stop and think and pray and ask, you know, the right questions and be able to say to a client, I'll have to think about this, I'll have to look at, you know, the paperwork, I'll have to go over these things, and then maybe we can talk again next week. And a lot of lawyers are not willing to do that because
you lose the person.
Sometimes you can lose a client. He's just going to walk out the door, she's going to walk out the door and go to the person down the street. But you have to be able to feel good about what you're doing, and once you are in it, it's almost impossible to get out of it. The courts don't let us out of it automatically. We have to ask the court to be relieved of counsel if we're in the middle of a proceeding where there is a court intervention, and they don't always let us out of it, and we're not always allowed to tell them the reason because of that code of ethics and the confidentiality that we're supposed to keep on behalf of the client. It becomes a very, very difficult
Very
struggle.
messy.
Oh my gosh, very, very messy.
I think that's a good point. You know, Father Benedict Rochelle said to me once, and he was almost the universal spiritual director, and he said, Barbara, there really isn't any black and white answers anymore. You know, we're so complicated. There's a lot of gray stuff that we have to really negotiate and dance around.
I am so happy you said that, because clients oftentimes come to you and they want an immediate answer. Well, is it A or is it B? And even in the law, especially in the law, everything is very, very gray. It could be this, it could be that. You have no idea how a judge is going to rule. This is what the cases say, this is what the statute says. Judges interpret them differently. Sometimes the judge is wrong. Then you have an appellate process. Do you really want to pay all those legal fees to find out what the answer is? And you may not necessarily agree with the answer. Or 3 of the judges might not agree with the other 6 judges, but you know, still you've got a decision that nobody's really happy with. So you are, and Father Rochelle is exactly right. Nothing is black and white in this world.
So were you very enthusiastic in your youth when you became a lawyer? Were you idealistic and hopeful and striving to help people and optimistic that you could? And now after 20 years, you look back and you say things are not as easy as you had hoped it were.
Oh my gosh, every day, probably for the first 10 years, it was pretty much a home run, because I was learning. I was fortunate enough to get a job at a very big firm, and I was learning, and so a lot of what I did was what I was told to do, and what I had to do. Some of it I didn't like, and that was tough for me.
Are you in private practice now?
I am in private practice, yes. I left the firm and I opened my own practice, so I have a little bit more autonomy as to what I can do. But the answer is yes. When I went to law school, I went to law school because I wanted to advocate for abused children.
Oh my gosh, wow.
Which was really something that I felt very passionate about, and I still do feel passionate about. And unfortunately, I realized very quickly that it was going to be very difficult for me to be able to put my own son through college if I was going to do that. And there wasn't at the
a lot
time,
of money there.
No, there wasn't a lot of money there to do that, so I wasn't able to do that. Through different things, I've been able to do some pro bono work, which is free work through the bar associations for different people, not necessarily children. One of the things I'm also able to do is put myself on what they call a Part 36 list, and the court will appoint you as an evaluator or a court examiner in a case where there's a child and people are pulling that child in different directions. So there's an opportunity for me to do that. But yes, you're quite right, Father. I was so enthusiastic about it. So enthusiastic that I worked full time and went to law school and was raising a son because I really, really wanted to do it. And it's only been recently that Barbara's helped me to become a little more enthusiastic about what I'm doing, in just helping me through the channels that show me that yes, God is with me. The Holy Spirit is my constant companion. I think about that every morning. And it's become a much more pleasant experience for me, again, and in large part to a lot of direction and guidance that I've gotten from Barbara. So I really am extremely indebted to her.
Thank you for that personal sharing.
That made my day in here.
Well, I could agree too. Barbara is very amazing and very inspirational, so thank you for all your knowledge with the Lord, and Father Peter too. I can't forget about you. So yes, we're all in agreement with that.
Yeah, I was going to say to Suzanne that I think one of the good things about our jobs is that we have to really keep looking at our own conscience. Like, I have to keep asking myself all the time, wait, why did you just do that? are you trying to make an extra dollar here, or do you really feel the person needs, because I say to people when they come, I think I've said this to you just kind of jokingly, hey, you want to talk about your parents? I can make a lot of money, and we could talk for another 20 years.
And you're exactly right, and I say that to people all the time. Hey, you want to see your sister? Absolutely, I can make a lot of money, but you don't understand. You may have the finances, and you may say, hey, it's all about the principal. It's always about the principal. It's never about the money for the clients. And I say that with tongue in cheek, obviously, but it's always a struggle, because yes, there are many times where you can take a case, but I find myself a lot more times than not trying to tell people that the emotional toll it takes on breaking a family apart over a few dollars, or sometimes, mom's silverware, is just, it's just something that they're not going to be able to live with 20 years later. They may not realize that now, but, down the road, it's a very big struggle. But it's always a struggle, and it's a running joke. I say that about my vet. It's not just the legal profession, right? I say it about the veterinarian and the doctors, right. And I probably...
And all the helping professions, really. Right. And
funded their summer homes and things like that.
Yeah,
I don't
right.
have one, but...
I guess things were a little more simple in the days of Jesus, but there even are certain admonitions that the Lord gives. Settle with your opponent on the way to court. In other words, try arbitration. And then, of course, when you have a problem with your brother, try to sit down with him privately. If not, bring in a few friends. Then St. Paul even says, then take it to the church. See if the priest can
before
sit
the
down.
court.
But then the court's the last resort. Because if your relatives, the priest, the church, nobody can help you, then you got to go to court. So there's very rough guidelines even in Scripture about some of this stuff.
Yeah. And I call myself the Queen of Settlement. It's, again, so against my financial interests, and I know a lot of to settle, of course, and a lot of my colleagues don't appreciate that, but I find that to be my job in life when I have some type of litigation in front of me, is to just try to get these people to settle. Sometimes to the extent, I just had a family, I hauled them in from different states and put them before the judge, and I said, Judge, I cannot get these folks to settle. The other attorney cannot get his client to settle. I would like your help. And I had a colleague help me with this, but the judge did agree. And a case that has been lingering for 5 years, people have paid ridiculous amounts of money for depositions, finally settled. And this man was suing his mother. He had done something with his grandmother's will to cut his mother and his aunt and his uncle out. And we were fighting desperately to get that will thrown.
Wow.
But the judge was able, and it took some time, so I didn't feel so bad that it wasn't just me and it wasn't just the other attorney.
Even with the judge, it took some time.
Even with the judge, it took about 5 hours. We actually had to be escorted out of the courthouse because it was all locked up, and security had to stay later to do it. But I was so happy. I was literally crying when I walked out the door. Because
what a great intervention that was on your part.
Really, well, Barbara, I give a lot of credit to God, because I say a lot of prayers.
Yeah.
I really, really
That's
do.
Totally a God
It's
thing.
Amazing. I said a lot of prayers through law school. Every time I took an exam, there was prayers said, and always a memorare to the.
And it is God's work, because, and I deal with the other side of it, where when mom's silverware doesn't go to the right person, people don't talk to each other for 20 years, and then they don't even remember what the issue was. They don't talk to each other, but they hate each other. And I do the same thing. I'm like, life is so short. You don't want to get yourself into this bitter place, But before we end, I'd like to get some of Michael's thoughts on what you're hearing about all this, and maybe you can give us a little idea of how to apply it to your age group and when you're thinking of a career and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, it's it's interesting hearing all about your stories, and I really do take them to heart. I think the work that you do and the way that you do it, the way that you use God and your emotions to guide you is just beautiful. And I think you really are doing God's work. And it's great for me to hear because I'm just kind of beginning my journey as well. And I mean, we're all kind of beginning every day. I think that's kind of a beautiful way of putting it. But I just wanted to say that it's great for me to hear all this stuff because, again, I'm just kind of beginning, but it's great to hear from someone who's a little bit further down the line in their journey and who's had some of these experiences, in actually dealing with people in their jobs and not just, dealing with friends and smaller problems, but actual life-changing and family issues that have a big impact. And the way that you're able to carry yourself with your faith in those moments of your life, it's a big testament to the character of who you are. And I find that you're kind of almost like a role model to me now. So I'll try to
Oh my gosh.
in my experiences in my future career, I hope to have your level of faith. So thank you for that.
I gotta put in a word for Michael. He just made me. This is the most exciting thing in technology. He is a 3D printer,
Mm-hmm.
right?
That's right. Yeah, I dabble.
And he just made me a little rosary circle, a little rosary bead printed out of plastic.
Yeah.
This is the most exciting thing.
It's pretty cool.
Oh, beautiful.
3D printing. So things are getting printed. Like people will need parts for their heart and stuff like that, and they'll be able to print them.
Yeah,
right?
out of there's a biogel that you can use now with 3D printing. I won't go into the details because I'd be here for another 3 hours, but yeah, I think that's what I'm gonna try to get into, the biomedical field and with 3D printing. So yeah.
So exciting.
Sounds cool.
I just want to say, I just read an article last week about how they are going to build buildings with 3D printing, and they think they're going to build buildings in space with 3D printing.
Wow.
But they're saying that the whole entire construction industry, the houses, the buildings are going to be built with 3D printing. So you're really on a road, Michael, to something brand new, and sounds like you're going to have a job for a very long time.
Yes,
Very good.
I keep remembering that comment in what was it? That famous comment, that famous movie.
Plastics.
Yeah,
Dustin,
plastics
the
on
uncle says
plastics.
He was the hippie. He wanted to go direct to the values and all, but this guy was saying he was right. I mean, plastics were going to explode.
Mrs. Robinson.
Yeah, right. It was going to explode. But the other thing I wanted to bring to this little table was Barbara's daughter got me to watch an episode of that series, Middle. I don't know if you've seen it. I haven't seen too much of it, and I forget the name of the lead actress in it. But it was actually a scenario where it was family issues, and not the end of the world, but her daughter has developmental issues, and she was rejected from all the high school teams or didn't make them. Finally, she's running cross country because they don't cut anybody out. Everybody can, and then all of a sudden the school board is hitting a budget crisis, and they want to cut the cross-country team. So she's praying. But I said, it's a long time since I saw a TV show that actually had one of the stars praying. I mean, it was a homespun, simple prayer, but she is actually shown praying. And so I say how secular our world has become, because that would have been taken for granted in a certain sense in previous generations. It's not any longer. Prayer, it seemed like strange to see it. Even though I'm a professional prayer and have to say mass and so all the time, it seemed prayer. Oh, this doesn't belong here. Prayer doesn't belong on television, and of course, yes, it does. I mean, you get tired of politicians that have nothing about God in their presentation, but what is at the end, and God bless America. Finally, the last as they walk off the podium, God bless America.
Well, thank you so much for that, Father. I'm sorry to cut you off, but thank you, guests, for today. Thank you, listeners. God bless you, and we'll see you. We'll hear you next time. Thank
Remember,
you.
it's your show. We
It's
want to
your
hear your
show.
stories
Yeah.
out there.
Bye-bye.
Amen.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
Great.
didn't realize we were